I'd like to be happy. I should be happy. I have, incredible luck. I'd like to be able to, look out the window and say, hey, life is good.
And you don't?
No.
Last year, Mike Shinoda of the genre-bending band Linkin Park
I tried so hard and got so far.
lost his friend and the band's frontman, Chester Bennington, to suicide.
The thing that I had that was really weird was a guilt for feeling sometimes like mad. Like mad at him sometimes a little bit, but like mad about just everything else.
He says he's left with a tangle of emotions.
It's just chaos.
Fellow travelers, this is what you want. This is what you need. This is the path to true happiness and wisdom.
We ask very simple questions. What makes you happy? What do you eat? What do you like to cook? And everywhere in the world we go and ask these very simple questions, we tend to get some really astonishing answers.
Kate Spade's husband is revealing details of her mental health struggles.
Kate's husband of 24 years, Andrew, confirming that his wife was battling depression and anxiety for years.
It was a complete shock, and it clearly wasn't her. There were personal demons she was battling.
Bourdain's mother tells the New York Times his close friend told her he had been in a dark mood these past couple of days. But to the outside world, there was little sign Bourdain was at risk.
Depression has been called the invisible disease because there's not an X-ray we can do, there's not a blood test we can do, and so it is so prevalent and yet still so under-recognized.
But having struggled with addiction, he acknowledged his demons as well.
Bourdain spoke of his struggles with depression in a 2016 episode of Parts Unknown.
The second time just this week, there's been a high-profile suicide. Celebrity chef Anthony Bourdain took his life. And this comes just a day after the CDC announced there's been a dramatic increase in suicide.
Rates have been rising in every state but Nevada.
There is nothing different between Anthony Bourdain, Kate Spade, and our kids that are killing each other. It's the same madness. Perhaps the difference is we were lucky enough with Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain that their madness only thought that other people had value, and only they did not.
It's shining a light on a topic some consider taboo.
People do not like to even discuss the issue that people take their own lives.
Mental illness does not discriminate. So every single person has the ability to develop a disease that they can't control.
A life cut short by personal despair is a reality that's happening with increasing frequency across our country. And the news of 2 celebrity suicides this past week only hints at the dimensions of this public health crisis.
What do we know about why this is happening?
Well, I don't think we really have a very good handle on why the numbers are going up, but it's clear that they are going up.
In half the country, the spike is more than 30%.
If you were a heart doctor and a report from the CDC came out that showed a 30% increase in deaths by heart attack,
it's ridiculous.
I mean, how do you feel when you get these numbers?
Hey, I live with it every day. It's appalling. And everybody goes, oh my goodness, what's happening? Why is this?
There is something wrong. There is something deeply and profoundly wrong in our society. And we have fleeting moments, just fractions of seconds, to where that window opens up and our guard is down and we're not fighting about things. There's this moment that we can open up and go, oh my gosh, there is something really wrong. By the end of the day, experts will have all of their expert talking points. We will have all kinds of stats thrown at us. Our eyes will glaze over, or we will think, oh, well, they know. Somebody's doing something. Why do you think the opioid crisis is so crazy right now? There's a hole in each of us. And people are looking instead of for an answer, they are instead looking for something to cover that hole. Because too many of us are afraid to look down into that abyss. We are too afraid to look inside of ourselves because even the strongest among us are terrified that if we look inside, there's not really anything of real value in there.
Suicide actually does not discriminate. The truth is that every person, no matter what their status in life, is human at the core of it and will face these kinds of struggles. And sometimes, ironically, it's our own identity and our self-perception that might keep us from seeking help.
And I think that where we get into a very ugly culture is when we begin to assume that we know what makes somebody else tick or what is driving them to the behavior that they fall into. As I was listening, as you did this week, to the tragic story first of Kate Spade and then of Anthony Bourdain. And if there's anything that we can learn from their tragic ends is that fame and fortune doesn't make for happiness. It's just very clear. Successful lives, public lives, famous lives, being beloved and lauded doesn't make happy because there's something inside of us that's much deeper. There's a darkness within us that cries out for something more satisfying than money and success. And sadly, it drives some people to take the worst steps.
The part we may never know is why, at age 61, this globe-trotting superstar appears to have taken his own life. He had a dream job.
Kate Spade's brand brought cheer to so many, but privately, Spade had her struggles. She was found dead inside her Upper East Side home Tuesday morning after allegedly hanging herself with a red scarf.
And so what we are left with are questions. How could two people with so much have nothing to live for?
What's happening to us? Kate Spade took her own life, hung herself with a scarf. There is a crisis that is happening. We all talk a good game about the suicides that are happening with our soldiers, but they're invisible to us. We don't want to look. We don't want to look. We forget what we're capable of. We forget who we really are. And when you are in clinical depression, the mind is your biggest enemy. Because it knows you better than you know you. It knows every single trapdoor. It knows every excuse. It knows every problem.
We must go further in detecting and treating mental illness, including more research on the brain-body connection.
Would never tell anybody to snap out of diabetes or snap out of asthma. You can't snap out of depression. We need much more understanding about what's going on with the wiring that leads to this.
As a psychiatrist, I see on a daily basis that suicide is an epidemic in our country. What I'd like to share with everyone is the fact that one person actually commits suicide every 16.2 minutes.
25 states, half of the United States, has seen a rise in suicide by more than 30%. We understand the... No, we don't.
But at the same time, when we sit back and do we not ask the question, but why did they do it? Well, we can guess, but I don't know. In the end, I don't know that anybody knows, but we know the action was wrong. The action was foolish. We can see the ramifications of the action. But at the same time, for me to sit and say, well, the reason he or she did what they did would be just rank speculation that doesn't help to guide, but sometimes helps to misguide. Now, the reason why that's not done more often in our private conversation is because it takes time. It takes time to sit down with somebody who's struggling and saying, look, I see what you did. Let's talk about why you did it. And let them begin to tell their story and to let out. But so often what we want to do is begin with, this was wrong, you're in sin, you need to repent, and you need to get right, and you need to... And immediately we make one thing very clear to them. We don't really care about the whys. All we care about is the what. Human behavior is controlled by why questions. Why do we do the things we do? Why did you buy the car that you bought? Why do you live in this city? Why do you have the kind of job you have? What's the why behind the things that you choose for yourself? That answers the deeper questions, a question that oftentimes we don't even ask ourselves. But God is desperately concerned with the whys we do what we do. You see, there are reasons behind behavior, and a lot of times we just want to focus on the action and speak to that action and tell people why that action is wrong and they shouldn't be doing that, when every one of us has a reason behind it. If we would just simply take the time and say, you did this, and I mean, that's obvious, I don't want to dwell on that, but I want to dwell on why did you do that? Help me understand why you made those choices and those decisions. And I find it's interesting how that we live in such an instantaneous culture. We live in a culture where if we watch the evening news, it jumps from tragedy to tragedy to tragedy to tragedy, and now this, and they go right to a commercial of some banal thing that they're advertising. And our minds begin to become conditioned to this kind of jumping quickly from thing to thing and not thinking deeply, not digging a little deeper and saying, what exactly is the story here? What is actually going on? I just tell you, there's a reason why I tend to like to read my news stories on the internet and read the entirety of the article, because usually I find the most important information is the last paragraph. And sometimes I think that's intentional. But it's easy to draw snap judgments about everything that's going on in life, even snippets of information we hear about somebody else. Did you hear that? And right away, we're caught up. And we may be operating upon something that's not even accurate. Someone once said, the only exercise Christians ever get is jumping to conclusions and leaping to judgment. Maybe that's why Paul, in writing to the Philippians, he's talking about how can you have peace in your mind. He says, finally, brothers, whatever is true, think on such things. Think on things that you know to be true, not things that you just heard or might be true. Now, I know as I'm saying some of this, I am really jamming the mental gears of a lot of you people, because you're thinking, wait a minute, I function in the world of rumor. Yet, it is impossible not to judge other people's actions, because Jesus again told us, by their fruits you shall know them. But we must do it with a cautiousness and a humility, avoiding the typical pitfalls characteristic of people who are harsh in their criticisms of others. Jesus especially warned about three kinds of judgments or way of judging. And I would characterize the first as being simply rash judgment. One of the worst errors that you and I can make is to judge people rashly. Proverbs 18:13 says, "He who answers before listening, that is his folly and his shame." In other words, if you give an answer before you have all the facts, you're probably going to be embarrassed by what you've said or what you've concluded. I find this is a hard thing for most of us. Most of us see or hear something and we immediately react to it. I think how often we find, for example, in our news cycle, a snippet of a comment is posted as if it summarizes the entirety of the message, only later on to find out that it was highly redacted and highly edited to give a different impression, to sensationalize something that really had nothing to be sensationalized by. It happens all the time. People say things for certain effects. And the simple fact is, if we begin to draw conclusions without having all the facts, then we're very, very likely to draw conclusions that are incorrect. I remember there's a Christian, supposed to be a Christian website where they post different things for Christians, and what I realized when I went there for the first time after being recommended, that all it is really accusations and gossips about other churches and ministries. And I read down, and you think you're getting you read this one article and go, I can't believe they did that. And then you read somebody else responds, and the other person tells them that guy's getting it all wrong, and he's not telling you the truth. And I realized that this website, called a Christian website, called a Christian discernment website, is essentially gossip. Judging is a natural function of our brain as it seeks to sort out the myriad of information that is really cascading into our heads 24/7. What it does is enables us to determine what is safe or what is unsafe, what is beneficial or harmful, what's desirable or something we should avoid. So we need to make those kind of discriminating judgments. We need to be able to look at somebody and saying, that's not safe what you're doing right now. That's not a good call on your part. The truth is, we cannot not judge. But what we can do, as James said, is to allow mercy to triumph over that judgment. That every day and every way you're going to see and hear things that you think are not the best choice. And how you choose to respond that, whether by condemnation or by mercy, is the one choice that you have. Now, part of that ties into this second word that appears in the New Testament. It's the word anakrino. When Paul says to the Corinthians, in 1 Corinthians 2:15, he says, the spiritual person judges all things. This is the word anakrino, not krino, but anakrino. It has a prefix, ana. And what it basically said, it's a judgment, but it's different than just right and wrong. It's a discerning judgment. It's an examining, an investigating, a scrutinizing, an estimating, a determination. In other words, it doesn't want to bring a judgment as much as it wants to understand why the person who made the decision did so. It's asking the why question. And the reason why I think this distinction is important is because life itself would be impossible to navigate if we were unable to make value-based judgments about what is good or what is bad, what is true or what is false, what's right or what is wrong. The reason why we should do this is because Jesus tells us it's in our own best interest. Because he went on to point out that the universe kind of operates on what I call the reciprocal principle. He put it this way, for what with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. In other words, you're going to get what you give regardless. That's why Paul said to the Galatians, a man reaps what he sows. And therefore, if we know that we're going to reap whatever we sow, we follow Jesus' words where he parallels this passage in Luke's gospel, and he says, do to others as you would have them do to you. We call it the golden rule. It's not wrong to help people get the speck out of their eyes so that they can see more clearly. And all of us have times in our life where we need someone to help us to see ourselves and our life and our relationships and the world around us more clearly. Hopefully, that's what I'm doing right now. Is trying to take specks out of our eyes so that we can see the world around us more clearly. We can see each other more clearly. That we can look at each other in a way that kind of says, you're not okay and I'm not okay, but that's okay with me. That we're all damaged goods. We're all lame and limping, you know. As Dan Allender in his wonderful book on ministry said, leading with a limp. He said, I don't trust a pastor who doesn't lead with a limp. There's something about that brokenness in our lives that should make us feel safe, because people who are openly broken in their lives aren't pretending to be something that they're not. They're not trying to draw the praise to themselves. They recognize even more than many of us do that God is the one who is good and gracious and kind, and he's the one who alone should be worshiped. That all men have feet of clay.